What's going on, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Ralph's Real Review, where today we are going over Sleeping Beauty. Before I get into it, there's not much of an update in terms of subscribers because I just uploaded today. I'm actually kind of working ahead. I took a flight out to Los Angeles, and I was able to watch a couple of movies on the flight. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of pre-record these. So, let's get into it. So essentially, Princess Aurora is born at the beginning of this movie, and they're having this giant celebration, and everyone is invited instead of Maleficent. So Maleficent kind of just pulls up and goes, "Okay, thanks for not inviting me. Why wasn't I invited?" And they were like, "Because we didn't want you here." And she was like, "Cool, I'm gonna leave your baby alone right now, but if she ever picks her finger on a wheel, she's gonna die because I'm cursing her." Essentially, the king and the queen, they decide to burn all the wheels in the town, and then these three fairies who came to like give her gifts decide to come up with this plan that they're going to take her as a baby and raise her in the woods, hide her from everyone until she turns 16. This plan works until she turns 16 and literally like the day of her 16th birthday leaves the house, falls in love with Prince Philip, who like is older than her. End up meeting by chance in the woods, and they fall in love with each other. Aurora does end up pricking her finger on the wheel, and then it's up to Prince Philip to save her, which he does, and then they get married and live happily ever after because it's a Disney movie. Comes to the animation department, I'm actually really high on Sleeping Beauty. I have it at one, and it's going to be weird, right? Because I was doing a lot of research on this one when it comes to historical significance. I'll get to that in a second. There's going to be some things that I'm going to be in agreement with critical response, and there's going to be some things that I'm not. And you have to remember when I'm doing these rankings, I'm trying my best to be objective, but it's still my opinion, right? So with this one, I do have Sleeping Beauty at one. That does tend to line up with critical response to this movie. So when I was watching this movie, I envisioned Hunchback. And as I was watching Hunchback, it felt very much like the backgrounds and the side characters were similar between these two movies, but obviously Hunchback came out about 30 something years later, whereas Sleeping Beauty came out now. But it's still like Hunchback is going to get its love when I get to that movie, but there was a difference in how they did background animation then, when especially when it comes to like large crowds. In this movie, it stood out to me that the crowds weren't moving that way, but it was clear that this kind of felt like a predecessor to Hunchback. And as I was doing research, that more or less was the case. They loved the animation in this movie and used it as inspiration for that movie. And overall, I felt like the characters were very well animated. I thought that the use of magic in this movie was fun to watch, and I think in part that is because of the animation. So I just think, and then finally the final action scene between Prince Philip and Dragon Maleficent. I felt it was a really good, very well animated movie, so I put it at one. When it came to storytelling, I did have Sleeping Beauty at seven, right ahead of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And it was interesting for this one too, because I did like this movie humor wise. I felt like especially the three fairies. The three fairies to me were like my favorite part of this movie outside of like Maleficent. Um, but however, they weren't enough to carry the entire thing. And I do feel like on the low, like they are more so they're not the main character, the plot doesn't revolve around them, but they do the most in this movie, right? And for a movie that's supposed to be about Aurora, or a movie that's not supposed to be about Maleficent, but where Maleficent is the most remembered character, I felt like these characters had a lot to do. And while I feel like they did it well, there was also sequences that felt like they could have been cut. So because of that, I put it above all the anthology movies, but down at seven in the plot department. Also, for a lot of these movies, the premise kind of seems ridiculous, but for this one, there were a lot of things that like felt very, very ridiculous. So, in the characters department, I'm going to put Sleeping Beauty at five, right ahead of Alice in Wonderland. When I first did this, I had it right below Alice in Wonderland. The reality of the situation here is that Maleficent carries. Up until this point, we're starting to get into the era of villains. We had the Evil Queen. I wouldn't say we had another real, like, true villain. You have Lady Tremaine, but she's just like a bad person. Captain Hook, you could say, is like a villain. Maleficent is at a different level of evil, right? She literally cursed this baby to die because she wasn't invited to a party. She summons, quote unquote, the powers of hell, right? Like she is just an evil person for the sake of being evil. Yes, Maleficent came out decades later and explained her backstory. But in this movie, you have no backstory. She's just a bad guy. And she's good at being bad, right? So, as far as Disney villains, you could argue to this day. Now, the 90s is going to give us some, but up until this point, for sure, Maleficent is the Disney villain. And you could argue that Maleficent, even in 2024, is the greatest Disney villain. We'll get to that in a little bit. But she carries and puts it that high. I would say, unfortunately, where it like kind of balances out is that Aurora as a princess, as a Disney princess, is probably the most forgotten. I'd have to like look at their lineup. But if you're looking at the classic princesses, Cinderella obviously is on top. Snow White, I would say, is above Aurora. Like, I can't think of people nowadays who say Aurora is my favorite Disney princess, and for a good reason. In this movie, she doesn't do too much. She is, charming for what she does, but she doesn't have too many outstanding qualities that the others don't have. Right, so because of that, she kind of falls down the list, and then you do have the fairies, who are, I actually really like them, but I would say that they're not very memorable in the grand scheme of Disney history and in animated characters. Strong characters, but not memorable. And then you have Prince Philip, who to this point is probably the best Disney prince, but Disney princes, that's not saying much. So right now, 5 for characters. At the Disney factor, I am going to put Sleeping Beauty at 3. The reality of the situation is it has everything you need in a Disney movie, except for, well, no, it even has the song, right? So you got a song that has withstood, right? Once Upon a Dream. You have a villain, you have fairies, you have magic, you have a princess, you have a prince. What else do you need, right? The reason it comes in at 3 is because I feel like the movies above it not only did it first, but did it better and kind of set that template. But when it comes to feeling like a Disney movie, Sleeping Beauty has everything you need. So at music, I have Sleeping Beauty at 8 between the Three Caballeros and Lady and the Tramp. And the reason that I have it here, I feel like they forced music into this movie that didn't have to be in this movie. You have Once Upon a Dream, and then there's a bunch of sequences of singing that just elongate the movie to a point that it's like it's skippable, and the music to me isn't great. Um, Essentially, when I'm going through this music category, I'm looking at what are your highlights, right? And if you have like a score that stands out to me as a casual viewer, then I will take that into consideration as well. This is where my opinion is going to differ from critical opinion, right? Critical opinion, this movie was nominated for a Grammy and an Academy Award for their score. It didn't stand out as much different to me, however many years later, right? So I can recognize that and say, as a current day viewer, the music isn't that great to me, but the score was recognized however many years ago. Let it balance out however you want to balance it out. But I feel like the highlight of this movie is Once Upon a Dream, and then every other song in it feels too long, not necessary, and yeah, that's why I have it where I have it. Box office success. This one is going to be a little bit interesting because it comes in at third at about $680 million adjusted for inflation. However, at the time, this was like Fantasia, a financial disaster. It opened up and it finished actually with less than its budget by about $900,000, which at the time, again, adjust that for inflation, it was a lot of money. It almost made Disney want to go out of animation. They were losing money, right? With the subsequent re-releases, it ended up skyrocketing, right? And it ended up becoming obviously a bigger success for all of its tie-ins in different ways. But at the time, it was considered a box office bomb. It was not great. However, like I said, with the re-releases, it does come out to 680 million, which I think is like number 40 all time. So it ended up making its money eventually. In the beginning, it did not. And then we have historical significance, and this one was very difficult because I was fighting between this and Peter Pan. So I ended up putting Peter Pan at 3 and Sleeping Beauty at 4. And the reason for this really, it's hard because even now that I'm saying it, like I want to change it. I feel like Sleeping Beauty is the technically, like if you look at the technical aspects of a film, the technically better movie than Peter Pan. I feel like Peter Pan is the more, and I don't feel like it's by a large margin. I feel like it's close, but I feel like Peter Pan is the more recognizable, the more fun, the more enjoyable movie to go back and watch. But when it comes to historical significance, they're both like they're both right next to each other. You have both of them as staples in the parks. You could look at Sleeping Beauty and say that's Sleeping Beauty's castle. You look at Phantasmic. You look at some of the parades that go through. Maleficent's dragon is part of the highlights of those shows, and that comes from Sleeping Beauty. You look at the animation part of it and how this movie, the way that it visually looked, inspired future animators. There is a lot going for Sleeping Beauty in this department. However, I feel like Peter Pan has stayed in the cultural eye longer and stronger than Sleeping Beauty has. I think for real movie buffs and people who are in the animation industry, Sleeping Beauty is more impactful, and you could look at the way that it is impactful, like kind of in our eye without noticing it. But again, Peter Pan to me is a more iconic film and has been used like in a similar, not in a similar way, but it's been used by the company enough to look at it and go, okay, the company's using both of these things in a certain way. Peter Pan and Sleeping Beauty are right there. The technical aspect is there, but the culture aspect is there. You could flip them if you wanted to put Sleeping Beauty at 3. I'm not upset at it. But right now, I think because of the fact that it has been so important in the cultural eye for Peter Pan, I'm going to give it the very, 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 very slight edge there. And that conversation should make the tier list easier because obviously I have it really as a tie with Peter Pan. So the question is, am I going to put it into a movie that everybody should see and put it right at the back end of that, or am I going to put it with Peter Pan as a movie that movie fans should see? And the reason that I'm going to put it in the movie fans category is I do think that it is a technically great film. I do think that if you are a movie fan, you will enjoy it. I do not know that a casual audience member will appreciate this movie the way that others who are watching it with a more like, I don't want to say a keen eye because I don't want to sound like elitist, and I'm not elitist. Like, I don't think I'm a movie elite. I think I'm more of a casual viewer, but I'm not all the way casual where I'm just turning something on and watching it, right? Like I'm watching it right now with a somewhat untrained but trying to be technical eye. So yeah, I feel like if I were to say to somebody like, "Hey, random 10-year-old, random 15-year-old, random 20-year-old here watch Sleeping Beauty," and they were to watch it, if they were someone who really enjoys movies and what goes into them, then maybe they would enjoy it. But if they're not that type of person, I don't think they would. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this a movie fans should watch. Let me know what you guys think. Should we have put Sleeping Beauty higher? Should we have put it lower? What do you think about to me, the most interesting part of this video is the historical significance piece. So if you have anything to chime in on with that, please go ahead and do so in the comments. Make sure you follow me on Instagram at Ralph's Review, where now I am posting my rapid reviews on Instagram as well. You'll also get notifications whenever I upload on there. You could follow me on TikTok at Ralph's Rapid Review. And then please, guys, continue to subscribe. I'm hoping that we reached our subscriber goal of 50 by the time this video was posted. But as of right now, it doesn't look like it. But if you haven't, please go ahead, subscribe, like it, comment, do the things that feed the algorithm, and share it to your fellow Disney fans or any movie fans you have in general. I'm gone. Bye, guys.